3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nerds Know Sports, the podcast about nerdy things in sports. This is our second episode, isn't that exciting? And today we're talking esports, but before we begin with our subject, I'd like to introduce the panel here. So, as always, I'm your host, Aaron, and with me today is...
Hi, I'm Jesus.
Hi, I'm Wilton.
Raymond.
And we are just gonna get to it. So, gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing good.
Pretty good.
All right, that's exciting. All right. So today we're talking esports, and before we begin, the big question on everybody's mind is, what is esports? And we have been graced with a expert on esports, our consultant, our analyst, our shining star here, Wilton.
Well, if I had to define esports, I'd say that it's the high-level competitive play of video games conducted between professionals who make a living out of playing these video games. At the core of it, there's a lot of other aspects, but that's pretty much it.
All right, that sounds really exciting. And, I don't really follow esports as closely. What I follow is more of the fighting game community, and that is transitioning to esports. And Jesus, what about you?
More of the same. I follow a lot of like Mortal Kombat the most, and then right now Hearthstone is starting to get really big, and it's transitioning its way as well into the esports community. So I watch a lot of that too.
What about you?
Watch a little bit of streams and stuff like that. Watch more of the Mortal Kombat stuff, but that's what I'm more into competitively wise, but that's really about it.
Oh, okay. So, just recently, I believe, E-League occurred, and E-League was a big thing because I believe Turner put money into E-League, and E-League was CSGO, so Counter-Strike, and, a shooter, and, I'd never really gotten into Counter-Strike. I was more of a, Call of Duty guy because, I had a console. There was no real way to avoid that. And I did MLG before MLG really took off, because I was in high school, so I wasn't at a point in my life where it's like, it didn't feel like it had gotten to a point where, a lot of athletes today get recruited very young. Where it's like, middle school, high school, and they're recruited. But like at that time, esports wasn't an avenue where you're like, there's money there, it's good money, it's, a steady stream. So, at that point in time, I couldn't have just said, Mom, Dad, I'm not going to college, I'm going to go, I'm going to play, COD. But now it's getting to a point where it feels a little bit more like an athlete's choice, where it's like I can go to college and get
a StarCraft scholarship.
Yeah, I can get a scholarship because
League of Legends.
Yeah, a league's. I mean, I believe in Europe there's a university where they're giving out like life tips in addition to game tips. They'll have teaching you strategies, but also like nutrition. So you can prolong your career, which is, I think something that a lot of sports like to emphasize. But so before we begin with, like a really deep thing, we have a question from Jacob, who was unfortunately unable to join us today. But he wants to know, why is esports so important? Because he doesn't really see the appeal right now, but like it's getting huge. Like when you think about video games, when you talk to like young people, when you talk to them about video games, a lot of them are like, well, I either want to, if they don't want to, go with a career where it's like, I want to make these things, a lot of them are like, well, I want to stream or I want to play competitively. So why do you think it's so important? We'll just start with, we'll go around the table. So, Jesus, would you like to?
We had this discussion earlier, and we were talking about how relatable video games are to everyone. Almost everybody can play a video game. It's a lot. You don't have to be in tip-top shape. You don't have to be able to you don't have to be able to dunk a basketball or throw a football 50 yards. Yeah. It's something that just about anybody can just pick up and do. And then it's not just that. There's such a big variety of video games that you can play shooting games, fighting games. I mean, there's strategy games. There's so many different avenues to go versus maybe 4 or 5 for regular sports. I think that's one of the reasons why it's growing so much. There's so many different types.
Yeah, and to add to that, the barrier to entry for video games is so small compared to actual sports. You don't need a physical place to do it. You just need a computer, and in the case of a game like League of Legends, it's free to play. You can make an account, you sign up for a Gmail, and then you're good to go. You can play the game. And with boasting such a huge player base, you actually understand what exactly you're looking at when you're watching pro level play.
I think the appeal too. A lot of young people now are just seeing a lot of these streamers going on there, making a lot of money, getting a lot of views, just making it really big. And I think a lot of the YouTube community was a big part of that, and then making the streamers even bigger and bigger now. So now you go follow them on YouTube, now you go follow them on Twitch, you go follow them on Facebook, Twitter, all that. So I think it's just the popularity pull in too. A lot of people are just like, oh, I'm a good competitive player too. Maybe I can start getting bigger, start playing off with all these bigger sports people, bigger fighting game people, stuff like that, and then start making relationships upon that.
Oh, definitely so. I mean, I feel like, when you watch like somebody like LeBron play basketball, you're like, I'm never gonna do that. Like, it doesn't matter how much I play, I'm never gonna be LeBron. But like when you watch somebody playing a game, you're like, well, if I put my time into a little bit of dedication, maybe I won't be as good as them, but I can, get in on this. And, like, I definitely think that's, like, the most, exciting part about it is that you feel like, when I'm 50, I could play something competitively, but I'm not playing basketball or football or hockey or baseball. Like, that's not happening. My body couldn't take that. And this leads me to Jacob's next question is, why do people compare esports to something like real sports? I think, personally, esports has gotten to a point where it's like on par with like poker or like pool or like bowling. Bowling is tough, but bowling is something where it's like I guess an activity you can do with your friends that isn't insanely high. It's not going to hurt you that bad, and it's also still competitive, but you wouldn't say like, well, I'm gonna go, bowling with this guy and I'm gonna like murk him or I'm gonna, mess him up, right? Or like, whereas with like basketball, it gets really intense. People get hurt. Football definitely. Baseball could go either way. It depends. But but with things like poker, you can just hang out with friends and play poker. And video games are the same way. So like, I think the growth of esports as a sport has followed the trajectory of things that a little bit more casual, but they're still a sport at a competitive level. So, do you think at this point it's the same as real sports?
If it isn't, it's pretty darn close. Just because the amount of money you can make, how competitive people are. I mean, there's certain team aspects where like you play a game like LOL or something, where you have multiple people on one team competing against another team. So it's on par in the competitive side. I mean, I guess it goes to how do you exactly define an actual sport. So I personally think that it should be considered a sport just because of the competitive nature, the amount of practice you have to put in to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, as someone who played sports in high school, the amount of hours you put in practicing and stuff and going, it's pretty much on par as what you would have to do to be competitive at an e-sport. When I was playing World of Warcraft, the amount of hours I had to put in to be a ranked player in that, it was more so than I was when I was playing basketball in high school. So, I mean, I think it should be considered.
What about you?
Most definitely, it's on par. And you definitely see it because of its rise of popularity. When streamers and players start showing their training regimens, and you see how grueling it is. They're sitting in front of computer screens for 8 to 10 hours. Just playing, and they're not messing around, and you see their schedules, and it has all the trappings of the risk involved with being an athlete. Many esports players, competitors, they don't last long. 15 years and carpal tunnel starts to set in. So it's definitely starting to resemble a sport. These athletes don't last forever.
Yeah, I'm starting to think it. Before, I used to be a non-believer and used to think that it was just like all fun and games and stuff like that till all these streamers and stuff started coming out. But I'm starting to think that now it's more of a competitive and it's going to be on par with sports because, of course, you have your kind of like party type of people who just want to play like Mario and stuff like that with friends, stuff like that. Then you got your competitive Smash players.
Yes.
So then you got stuff like that. And then not even about a year ago or so, I didn't even know about like tournaments like in my local area for like MK, Street Fighter and all that. And that's when you kind of go up to that more competitive level where you start kind of playing like rec league sports.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would equate that to those type of things. Like you're playing rec league sports, you're going out playing tournament fighting games with other people.
Right.
And then of course you got the championship stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then you take it up higher. So I mean, I think it's definitely on par because then you got your fun players, your casual players, then you got your kind of on par players too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like we're like we said, guys like us, we're not genetic like freaks of nature. Like, your LeBron James, your JJ Watts, your Rob Gronkowski's, guys that part of being great for them was having a genetic advantage over guys. But like, I think the most interesting thing is, we bring up fighting games because that's the thing we follow the most. Like I remember when I think South by Southwest did a exhibition in Ultra Street Fighter where my boy Yuji's Momochi took it, but there was a great moment where he like puts his finger up and he asks the tournament organizer, and I think it's Valle, and Valle comes over and he goes, I think there's something wrong with the screen. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's like it's too slow. It's on a delay. And they checked it and there was no delay. And they realized that his brain and his motor skills and his eyes were moving so fast that it felt like it was slower to him. Yeah. But in real life it was moving in real time. And that's the kind of stuff where it's I wouldn't say genetic freak, but that's that next level of you have, a little bit of that edge over a little bit.
You got that gift.
Yeah, exactly. You got the, so athletes have to commit to a certain level of diet, a certain level of training. I think it's, in a similar situation because I feel like people who are well, I wish when I was younger, esports was a thing, so I could have went to college with an esports degree. But I feel like it's so competitive. It's the same thing where it's you're not necessarily getting a degree from somewhere a scholarship opportunity from some big name university because you're all right. They want the best of the best. So I think that's on the similar part. But you don't have besides the diet. I think it'll get to a point where it's maybe the diet isn't affecting their play, but it's definitely affecting how they can continue on. Because carpal tunnel is a real thing, but also when you get a little bit fatigued, exactly. For instance, Daigo Umehara, legendary Street Fighter god, started recently. He started lifting more weights because he felt that if he was healthier, that would add to his longevity because because he's traveling all over the place doing these exhibitions that aren't necessarily games. It'd be if guys like LeBron or JJ or Gronk, they're going to one-on-one things where it's this isn't a big game, but you still got a similar level of effort attached to it, and you're doing that all the time. It's you want to stay healthy so you can continue to do this, and you can also compete at a higher level and things like that. So I think we're getting to a point where the athletes of esports are mirroring, maybe not to the point where it's every this day you're playing this many hours, every this, and then you got travel to go to the game, and then there's another game on this day and there's another game on that day. But there's definitely a similar amount of energy attached to it. So I think the biggest thing where we feel athletes kind of have a bigger issue is the risk of injury is so much more poignant. It's so much more tangible. One false move that could be your career. Yep. With esports, it feels yes, your body will catch up to you eventually, but it's not that thing where it's if you clicked a wrong way, your finger snaps, kind of thing.
True.
So how do you feel about like, you know, things like injury risk. It feels like, you know, like people are kind of veering away from letting kids play football because concussions are such a real thing. Do you think like we'll get to a point where parents are okay with their kids maybe pursuing something like esports because it's a little safer?
Honestly, I think it's going to take a little time before it gets to that point, but I think it will once they see the different avenues that kids can take with esports. Because I said, there's plenty of people who have made a really good living off of just playing video games. So, I mean, I think it will, because right now, too, the only two big issues that you're going to have with sport or esports are the eye strains. I mean, a lot of people don't use, like, gunner glasses and stuff like that. So, even like me, my vision has gotten a lot worse from just playing video games instead of being on a computer. And then carpal tunnel is the other big thing, but that's more of a doing when you're doing it for so many years that'll eventually happen. So, I mean, those are the two big things. And right now, there's a lot of parents that, for some reason, still think video games are kind of bad and stuff, and don't want their kids playing video games for hours at a time. They'd rather their kid go outside and do something.
Right.
So I think if we can get away from the stigma of that, then yeah, parents will definitely see the light one day.
It's really interesting you talk about injuries in esports because it really doesn't happen. Like you said, if you click wrong, you won't break your finger.
Mm.
But the thing about esports is that there's an unavoidable issue of eventual just degradation.
Mm.
In maybe in the conventional sports, you can play a sport for a number of years if you don't injure yourself too seriously.
Right.
But for esports, no matter how careful you are, to play at a high level, you need to force your body into these constant repetitive motions, which will eventually cause carpal tunnel.
Right.
So you may not get injured, but you will stop no matter what. So that is the weird thing about esports, that the timeline is still very short. It's just that it won't happen in one dramatic swoop. It will happen after 15 years, and you realize you're just not fast enough anymore.
I think the biggest thing, the biggest concern that I have with esports and injuries is going to probably be the eye strains too.
Mm.
I find out that even just being on a laptop,
Yeah.
just searching the web, because usually I play all my video games fairly close up, and I just realizing over time my eyes are getting worse and worse and worse. And then that goes along with any other sport too, though. Esports, I probably just think that it's not going to be as fast, but it definitely does happen. I personally play golf as my sport, and golf, there's hardly ever any kind of injury that you're really going to get, and maybe like twisting something. But as far as like somebody like hitting you with a ball, that you really can't help.
Yeah. That's freaking.
That's not gonna ever be your fault. And like a lot of people say, golf there should not be any injuries, but I actually tore all the muscles inside my forearm off of a bad swing. So I mean, it can happen to anybody. But esports, I don't see it happening as much. And as far as like the parents not being able to like understand like their kids playing video games for a long time, because I know when I was younger, my family didn't want me playing video games for a very long time because they're just like, you're going to mess up your eyes standing too close to the TV, you're going to jack up your hands and all that. I mean, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to see that a lot more now. And I just think that if we do train earlier, because I know they do sell those things that you work out your finger muscles with. And then I do use those now because my fingers do hurt me all the time. I don't know if that's because of the esports, because I did play a lot of video games when I was younger, and I still do play a lot of video games. But I just think that if we start training a lot more as like esport players, stuff like that, we won't run into as many problems. Just like as athletes train and stuff like that, get all their muscles nice and strong, same type of thing.
I definitely think there's something to be said about like, because it's a growing process. Like once you learn the proper technique to train, there'll be something like that. I mean, you bring up golf. Like Tiger Woods lost a lot of his like, I guess, finesse because his back, like because a lot of those swings that he was doing that looked pretty tore up his back, like
take a toll on you after a while.
Exactly. So I think the most interesting thing you can't think about as much with sports is like you think an athlete doesn't really stop for anything besides like serious injuries or things like that nature, but like. We talked about how some esports people have to hang it up because of personal life, because the salary just isn't enough to sustain a family life, so they have to get a real job, and if that job isn't available in the industry of their choice, like of that game, not as good. And that, I think, is the real risk of like making a life out of this. Is like, I don't know how competitive the salaries are for your team-based esports. I know for fighting games, a lot of it comes down to your placements. There's a comparison made by Hell Pockets of how fighting games is more like a, not combat, but like more like a prize fighting. It's more like, akin to boxing than it would be to a team sport, because it's you have teammates. And a lot of that is just you playing with each other, learning the intricacies of the characters and learning the matchups and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's still you one-on-one versus the other person, and then you just continue on. And a lot of times you'll just end up fighting your teammates too. There's team kills all the time. But that doesn't really happen with like team-based ones, because it's like, that's, like that'd be like somebody, taking out one of their teammates. That's not how that would go. But I definitely think like something like, personal life issues affects it more than something like unforeseen injury.
Mm-hmm.
Because, competitive salaries, all that, like football is one of the hardest sports to make it in because of just the effort it takes to make it, the amount of money you're going to get paid, the risk of injury is the highest of any of the big four sports. So the big four are football, basketball, baseball, and hockey in America. And it has the highest, rate of an injury that is unforeseeable or like long lasting, like a concussion or torn whatever, what have you, things like that. And a lot of times those players come back from those injuries and they're not the same, and guess what, they're going to get cut. And the life for them afterwards isn't like if you're just another name to them, they're not going to offer you a position. And it's unfortunate, but it's like that's just how the way it goes. So things like I also follow WWE a lot, but they're making an effort to like reach football players that are maybe can't play anymore, and be like, well, you gotta, obviously you're athletic, you got a good look, you can do these things. I mean, the next step is cutting promos and stuff like that, but it's it's teachable and stuff like that. But with like esports, it's kind of that thing where what happens to the people who have to get a real job and they have like certain good techniques with some things, but it doesn't necessarily translate to like a 9-to-5. Like, what do you think is like waiting for some of the people? Because if it's getting bigger, that means there's probably going to be less jobs for like guys that your average players. Like, what do you think is waiting for those people looking for a 9-to-5?
That's a tough situation because right now I think, now that we started talking about money, I think it's more, a lot of the times, with the exception of the top people, the people that get like top 4, top 8 and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it's more akin to being like a D-League almost for the rest of them, where those players still have to be as competitive as everyone else, they still have to train as hard as everyone else, but they're only getting paid, like for the D-Leaguers, they get paid $20,000 to $30,000 a year.
They're not getting much, yeah.
Yeah, so they still, a lot of them still have to get a regular job, and I think that's the similar situation with esports, is that if you're not someone that's getting top, like I said, top 4 usually, top 8, then that's going to be a situation where you may have to get like a regular job, and maybe a situation where you're working retail and you're still having to train every single day on top of that job if you want to stay competitive. So I mean, it's just a real tough situation for some of the more, I guess, not average players, but the more lower ranked players.
Well, the people that you wouldn't say like, if like, I don't know if it's getting to a point where betting is as, poignant in esports as it is in like normal sports, but like if we were making bets, like that person might be a dark horse, but you put money on them, but they have to put the same amount of time and effort as, your favorites.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up these tiered player slots, because if you look at Korea and China, and it's an extension, they have some of the most developed esports infrastructure. Korea especially is a shining example. And in that, you see big teams with almost 3 or 4 tiers of different players. In League of Legends, there's actually usually 2 teams. There's an A team and a B team. You do see team kills. People on the B team, it's a last-ditch effort. You either beat the A team and win the championship, or you'll stay the B team forever. And then if not, you drop down to the C, and no one even talks about the C team. And those people, they will make almost nothing, so they're just playing for heart, and they're looking for a chance to score more. You see this in all the esports played in Korea, and it's crazy. It's just like sports. You see these people, they have to work jobs and practice, and they don't get the approval of their family because it's, despite how developed the infrastructure is, when a child tells their parents they still want to be esports in Korea, they still cry.
I mean, it's not guaranteed money or like.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel about this whole situation?
Well, I say with esports being so new right now, we don't have, as players right now just don't have a lot of opportunities to get as much funding for personal life uses. I'm thinking back to like the old school skateboarders.
Okay.
When skateboarding was first like the big, like when it first broke out onto the scene.
Yeah.
People were trying to make money skating because they were good. But then they started making their own sponsorships. People started noticing them. People started going to events, stuff like that. And then now you can be actually paid and sponsored to be a skateboarder. So I'm thinking it's like that. I think esports is in its newer stages right now still, and we don't have as much corporate inside of it. Of course, we do have sponsors. I do remember watching like the esports on DirecTV when DirecTV was sponsoring an event for that. You do have stuff like that, but I don't think we have a pure directed esports thing, kind of like Twitch. So like if Twitch got more corporate, actually started paying everybody out like that, started sponsoring more events, stuff like that, then they say, hey, I'm going to try to actually train to be like on the Twitch team or something like that. You actually have like an actual fighting goal, whereas like these skateboarders are like, okay, I'm going to try to go for this this brand, I'm trying to go for this brand, try to go for this brand. Right now it's just so limited where it's just actual companies just sponsoring events, everybody's fighting for that. So I think if we actually started having like more established teams and more established like places to go, it'd be a lot easier financially too, because then you can always say, hey, if EA is going to have a team, maybe I can work at EA.
Right.
If Twitch is going to have a team, maybe I can like be a monitor for Twitch, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about Twitch, because although it's hard for like a starting esports athlete to get up in there, they actually have an incredible amount of power to boost themselves up through streaming. Even all the big established players, like all of TSM's players, they still stream because it's such a great revenue source, and it's a way to get popular, right? They connect directly with the audience through the chat system, and it's just a very interesting format that's a little bit different from traditional sports.
Okay, I mean, we definitely talked a little bit about like the evolution, the future of esports, and I think with traditional sports, there reaches a point where there's that person who changes the game in such a way where you have to limit things, like maybe limit the, change the rules so that other people can't take advantage of what that person took advantage of. And I don't think there is necessarily that for esports, where it's like, well, this person, unless, it's things like performance enhancing,
Adderall, so.
Yeah, drugs and things of that nature. But like, things I think are on a similar scale are like hidden technology that maybe the designers didn't purposely put in there, but the gamers find and they're like, hey, this right here is going to take my game to the next level, and that's going to make it easier for me to win. And I think that's really where a lot of the growth for the individual games are going, because it's not like you can release a new game where it'll be like this change, this change, this change. Like for instance, like in the fighting game community, people still play Melee, and the Melee players, I don't see a lot of the top Melee players playing the 4th Smash game. And the rules are different a little bit, because 4, they have the ability to like use like what the mods and stuff on the actual characters, so they get like a little bit of advantage versus like how Melee's played is more like kind of you're guarding the ledges, and you don't see that as much in 4. And I think it's interesting because you don't see that kind of thing. It's like if we were going to play basketball, the way basketball is played in America, in parts of America, aren't going to be like significantly different, because it's like, well, these rules have just been changed like this, like unless it's like something like our NCAA versus professional NBA, like like the shot clock's different, the halves are different. You can stay in the paint for significantly longer. But like, you know, like it's kind of a situation where young people like they'll develop their game for a pro style of what they're playing, but it doesn't reach a point where it's like I'm playing this game for a little while. Now there's a whole new game. It's similar to this, but I gotta learn all the new intricacies. Like Street Fighter V is coming out, and it's gonna be way different than 4. Like you're gonna have a basis from what you learned from 4, but it's not gonna be the same. There's still intricacies, and you know it's like a whole new game to tackle. And that I think is the, you know, struggle people in esports have to tackle is like adapting to the new games, not just the buffs, not just the, you know, nerfs and things of that nature. It's like a whole new game, and a lot of times you see those people, if they struggle, but also they don't necessarily want to go to the new one. So how do you feel about something where it's like you were good at the old one, but then the new one came out and you didn't want to bother? Like how do you feel about that in the sense that like the support for the old one isn't there anymore? So the monetary support isn't there. So like you kind of have to feel like someone who has to travel to the new one. How do you think that's like tougher for people than an athlete would have to deal with?
Honestly, I do think that it's a lot tougher than what an athlete will have to do that, because it's not very often that you get significant rule changes or something in a sport. I mean, the biggest difference I can think of for sports is probably in college football, where if you catch the football and one foot is out of bounds but one foot is in bounds, you don't have to get that second foot.
Yeah, there's no drag like in the NFL.
No toe drag rule.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the biggest differences. But other than that, there's nothing similar that I can think of to where an athlete would have to go through that all over. So I think when it comes to esports, that sometimes you're forced to adapt, because most people are going to move on to the new big game, whatever it is, the next newest iteration. So you're kind of forced, and that does make it tough, especially if you're really good at the old one. I mean, one of the things I noticed is that I was terrible at Mortal Kombat 9, but the way they changed it up for Mortal Kombat X, I was so much easier for me to play that game, so I didn't even want to touch the other one after that. And I think that's how it is with a lot of people. It's like once the new one comes out, it's like I don't want to touch the old one anymore. So it makes it tough for these players.
Yeah, certainly, I would have to say this is actually the biggest issue with esports, the biggest concern. It's a huge problem. It stems from many things. Developer support, whether or not they continue to support their games, whether or not they interfere too much. Because the thing about esports is that metagame is so important. For developers like Blizzard, you will see games unchanged for long periods of time, but the meta will always evolve because people haven't found everything out. So even without changing anything, people are evolving the game. Strategy will fade in and out, and people will figure out how to deal more effectively in the game. And when you talk about a game like League of Legends, which is probably the worst offender, Riot constantly patches the game, and they're split. There's a pro community who wants a certain type of video game, and then there's a large casual community with a huge cash flow who want an easier game to play that's more flashy, but it's more difficult for pros to play. And these pros are under stress, and you've seen it in the last championship for League of Legends. The top performing Chinese teams fell flat on their face because a patch 3 months before the final tournament. It was shocking. These were the top players in the region who were threatened to topple the previous champions, but they just could not adapt within 3 months rather. It was tough to see, and you really don't see this in sports. So for esports competitors, this is one of the biggest concerns, and that's not even considering new titles. The whole game changes.
Yeah, I definitely think that patch updates and new titles have a big thing to do with the esport community. I'm going to go kind of off of what Jesus was saying. I really sucked at Mortal Kombat 9. I was absolutely atrocious at that game. And then Mortal Kombat 10 came, and I started playing Jesus a lot more, and I had to get better.
Right.
So I started grinding, and then I eventually got really good at it. And then I realized that when I went back to 9, I actually knew how to play 9, and I went back and everything felt completely different. You start realizing that combo times are off, that there's different inputs and stuff like that you have to start doing. And definitely when I was at conventions and stuff like that, playing inside the rooms, a lot of people only kind of stuck to one game. It was literally only one game, and they never really switched games. A big example was seeing people play Smash and Melee.
Yeah.
Smash and Melee was a big thing. A lot of people that really were good at Smash didn't even touch Melee.
Mm-hmm.
People that are really good at Melee never touched Smash. And I think it's kind of that, if you know you're not good at it, a lot of people don't even want to kind of try at it
Right.
at a competitive level, which kind of sucks because it deters a lot of people away when you never really know how you're going to do unless you grind on it as much as you did
Right.
in the previous game. So, I mean, I think that when patch updates and stuff like this do come out, a big example for me was I used to play Naruto really competitively and ranked online.
Mhm.
And then when these updates would come out, the characters that you would use, you would have to completely switch around.
Right.
And the fighting style inputs would all be completely different. And you had to learn how to grind with that character because that's one of the games where it actually had a tier list.
Right.
And you always want to stay within the tier list, especially as a competitive player. And it does suck when you have to change and start adjusting all your characters. But then, of course, you always are going to have that one character that you're going to always kind of have reserved.
Right, yeah.
You're going to kind of always know who that is. And it's good to have that one character. But I would say as a competitive player, it does kind of suck because you do have to make that huge adjustment. And it's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Like me, I play Kenshi on Mortal Kombat. And Kenshi's not even a tier at all. And it absolutely sucks when I go play against like all these meta players that are playing everyone that's tier 1.
You know, like who is it? There's like some variation of Sub-Zero like that's really good. Who's Sonic Fox play? You know, the DLC characters are always tough.
Yeah, DLCs are always the worst characters to play against.
Yes.
Jason's just throwing machetes and stuff like that.
Everyone was playing Tempest Kung Lao for so long.
Yes,
Tempest Kung Lao.
And I used to hate
juggling
it.
degrees.
Tempest Kung Lao was everyone.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things is like adapting to a metagame. There is that in real sports. Like, for instance, like, you know, we are in an area where we're pro Niners, you know, we're anti Seahawks, but the thing we have to acknowledge is for a while, the Legion of Boom was such a scary thing to people that adaptation had to occur. And with football, a lot of that is like you got, you know, a whole season, there's film, there's all that stuff. And, you know, you'll have that in, you know, competitive, really competitive esports, but like, it took them so much time to adapt to things like, you know, like you have to play this player a certain way or acknowledge that the reason why the defense is so good is because the scheme isn't about like adjustment. It's that they're basically exerting their will on you, you know. It's like a lot of man-to-man zone kind of like thing. But like it took people so long to adapt to that just recently were, you know, the Seahawks have gone to 2 straight Super Bowls. They just got knocked out by the Panthers, and that was a big deal because it's like a team in the playoffs has finally adapted to this like thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you see similar things, like maybe not to such a level where it's like the next title isn't like in regular sports isn't like oh, you know, we have this new football rule or like that completely changes the game. It's more like you have a new coach, you have a new style. Your metagame is more like catered towards how you're being coached or what they want you to do for the team, and that comes with age. It comes with like your skill set, learning a new skill set, losing, you know, abilities and other things. But I think like I don't know if the title updates issue is something to like the degree of like a playing 2 sports at a competitive level. Like we're talking guys like Bo Jackson, you know, guys
Deion
like
Sanders.
you know, Prime Time, you know, guys that, you know, they excel to a point where they can play both. Like excelling is being able to play both professionally.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, you're a Hall of Fame in both. Like Bo Jackson had the best shot, but like what I'm saying is like you're looking at things where like those are 2 completely different games. Like the effort is just as much, and like it kind of feels like that when you get not a patch but a new title, where it's like, you know, like guys like, you know, the Melee community, like I said, if you look at the top 8, you don't see a single one of those guys in the top 8 of Smash 4. Or like, you know, like Marvel 2, like the gods of Marvel 2, a lot of them weren't gods in Marvel 3. Like Jay Wong was the one, but Jay Wong is a legend because he plays so many of the games, and that's kind of how you feel about the way esports is. Like, you know, these guys that started really young got the fundamentals and kind of like adapted their fundamentals to other games. And it's like, because, you know, like for instance, like there's something to be said about like having really good footwork in something like soccer it'll translate to football, but your hands won't translate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and same thing with basketball. Like, you know, your hands to catch a ball can be really great in football, and it'll help you in basketball, but you gotta dribble. You can't, you know, just run. You know, you can't travel.
Yeah.
You gotta have, you know, if you're big and tall, you have to have soft hands around the rim. You gotta, you know, learn to shoot, like things like that. It's a whole nother set of things where it's like, I learned, you know, this thing to play this one thing, and it'll translate. But then there's this whole other things that I have to do. Like, you know, I think it's kind of like how people who played shooters, like, you know, there's a guy who he got top, I think 4 at Evo and KI, and they interviewed him, and this dude started off as a FPS guy, and it was crazy. I mean, I'm the same. You know, I started off as a first-person shooter kid, and now I'm more into fighting games, and it's different. Like, you know, it's this thing where like there's the fundamentals, but you know, there's like all these other things you gotta learn and stuff like that. So I think, you know, with esports, that commitment, it's there. Like an athlete would have to commit. So I think the next thing we should talk about is, you know, teams. So like for the FGC, it's a little different because it's more of a prize fight. It's more like your MMAs, your like boxing. So you won't get in a situation where you'll be like, hey, you know, like a team win is when one of the members of the team won, not when if all the members are like, there's a bunch of them in top 8. That's not necessarily a team win if they didn't win the thing. So like, with the way teams like, I'm sure Wilton, you can talk about this, but how the teams are built in things like League of Legends, things like Dota, things of that nature, you know, like StarCraft, but the teams are built similar to how front office is built in, you know, football, basketball, baseball, these things, right? Because, you know, you have guys that are, you know, the owners, the general managers, you know, like your coaches and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like those things are prevalent, right?
They exist.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, you know, like recently retired basketball player Rick Fox bought an esports team, and you know when ESPN did coverage with him, a lot of things, it's a similar thing where it's like you're recruiting these kids, you're scouting them out, you're talking to them. You can't release it to the public because it's like, you know, in sports it's released to the public because those players say out in the open, you know, like when you're going to college, I'm being recruited by this, and this. I'm going to go to visits. And even the same thing with, you know, professional sports. It's like you're getting recruited by these teams, they meet with you, you know, there's designated meeting times. But I think, you know, things like that, it's the same thing. So like, you know, teams have captains, right? You know?
Yes, definitely.
And, you know, there's a GM owner. How do you feel about the idea that the owner, it hasn't gotten to a point where you can necessarily hire a GM. Maybe you can hire an agent where that person goes to talk to the people, but you don't have a GM where it's like, hey, you know, get me with that guy, and I will bring this to the owner. It feels like the owner, it's so early in the sport, the owner is the GM, the agents, and all that stuff. So, like, how do you think it'll get to a point where it'll basically mirror traditional sports in that sense?
I do think it will. One of the biggest thing is that, like we've been saying all day, is that it's in the early stages right now. So once there's more teams out there, once more owners are out here saying that, you know what, I'm going to put together an esports team for whatever game it is, whether it's LoL or Dota or something, I think it's going to have to get to that point because you're going to want to take all the best players. And once we get more people that are willing to start this as their career, once we get to that point where there's going to be tons of people, they're going to have to start recruiting like that because you want to build the best team. Just like in any other sport, you want to build the best team. So that's going to require visits to these players, trying to recruit them, say, you know, this is why you should be going here, coming with us and stuff. So I think it will.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely early, and it's due to a lot of things, actually, in my opinion. The first thing is that the video game industry as a whole is unstable right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's just games flipping in and out. And also, it's because the talent pool is so huge because there's so many people playing it.
Yeah.
And you'll see teams flip in and out just because you can just go on the ladder, look at the top 5 guys and ask, you want to play for my team?
Okay.
Yeah, at this point though, you're right. The owner is the general manager because they started up and they put their foot in there, and they try to launch from that. The team thing is interesting because even in fighting games and StarCraft, which are both one-on-one matches, you see teams matter because you get exclusive access to training partners. That matters especially in StarCraft. Especially if you have a bad matchup, you can play with one of the top Zerg or Protoss or Terran, and when you need to fight your bad matchup, you have the experience because you were part of the team. You had the ability and access to train with that partner. And the same could be said with fighting games. You see,
definitely.
Yeah, you see bad matchups, but if you have a good partner who plays this bad matchup character, you're gonna do well.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's also interesting because you get situations where it's like not necessarily teams, but communities will be like like in Street Fighter specifically. You have Topangas where the Japanese players are sponsored by different entities and teams, but they get together and they're basically that's their training regimen is like going through each other. So like they're prepared for any matchup because these guys are the best of the character they play. So how do you feel about the whole thing about how an esports team is being run right now?
I think definitely that esports it is all still newer right now, and there is no type of draft for it right now. It's all essentially just everybody's just looking. Oh, top 5 players. Oh, we should merge all together, or we should just all combat each other, something like that. Because definitely you always see top players fighting top players. That's always how you stay good.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that since it is in the early stages, we're not going to have any type of draft or anything like that. It's just going to be top players mixing with top players and stuff like that. And until we do get an actual guideline for how we're going to actually start dividing up teams and stuff like that, especially in the esports community, it's just going to be top players, top players, top players.
I mean, there's something to be said about, like contracts in your traditional sports have an expiration date, and that's when they hit free agency. But like free agency for some players is either their life or like whenever somebody talks to them and then they'll work out a contract. It's kind of more akin to how soccer does it as opposed to how the big 4 sports here, because it's like if you want that player you'd have to trade another player. It's not as easy as saying we'll just buy out their contract. It's like no, they want something back in return. And it hasn't really reached that point in esports yet, and when it does it'll be very interesting. But I think this is one of the most interesting things, and this isn't really probable in traditional sports, but how do you feel about teams surviving on just one guy, basically, or gal?
Oh,
like the star. Like, no, not even the carry. Like, let's say if, Evil Geniuses only had J1, or Razor only had, well, they're all good, but you know what I mean? Like, or like something where it's like if the Cavs were literally just LeBron.
You mean like the 2007 Cavs?
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Like you'll see situations. No. It's true. The 2007 Cavs made the NBA Finals literally with LeBron, and if you could name 5 other guys on that roster, you're a fan. Like Boobie Gibson or Pavlovich and Ilgauskas, guys like that. But that's what I'm saying. Like basketball got to a point for because it's not as many people where LeBron carried his team to the finals. That's not as necessarily as possible in esports, is it? Like where one guy carries the entire team to the finish line. Like
it's actually debatable. You see it a lot actually in League of Legends, CS:GO. In League of Legends, but I can't remember what their name is. It's the big Korean team. They had Faker the God. He was called the God because he was like a Wild West beast, just rolling ladder. They picked him up, and he just star play after star play. And no matter how good other people were, people always pointed to him for the reason the team was doing so well. And for a while, people thought he was unbeatable.
Right.
I mean, eventually he was beaten, but he still carried the team for so long. In CS:GO, you see all these compilations because as an FPS, right, a headshot with a shotgun is all it takes to kill.
Yeah.
You see a guy, 1 league, 4 people. He would kill the entire team if he was the bomb. And you can see these carry moments, definitely maybe not as prevalent, but it's certainly possible because the skill difference between players still exists.
Yep. I mean, I definitely, like you said, there's a lot of moments where it kind of becomes a one-man army thing, where the lone survivor in things like FPS especially. But, with things like the fighting game community, it's kind of harder to judge because it's a prize fighter. So, for instance, in Mortal Kombat, Sonic Fox is it's barely debatable. He's easily the best.
Yeah.
But, who, can you name another person on this team? Because I can't.
I can't either.
But when you talk about Yomi, you know all the big Yomi guys, because DJT and MIT, they're both they're brothers, and you have Forever King and all these guys, but they're big, but they're not winning all the tournaments. One guy is winning all these tournaments. He's bringing prestige to his team, and you don't even necessarily know who his teammates are, and that's more possible in fighting games, I think, because it's a prize fighter.
Yeah.
When it happens in Street Fighter too. The Mad Catz boys are all specifically run in such a way, or the Razor boys, but EG, for depending on the game, it'll just be one guy basically. In Street Fighter, it's debatable. Ricky's pretty good, but Ricky hasn't been doing as well as she would like. Rog is a coin flip, depending on he gets really good or he gets in his own head, and then Jay Wong is a consistency, but he plays a character that is not necessarily as good.
Yeah.
And but in Marvel, it's just Jay Wong versus just Filipino champ versus just Chris G.
Yes.
And their teams, a lot of them aren't as famous. They went after those players specifically because it's we want recognition. We're going to sponsor this person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's easier for fighting games, but it's with a team-based game, it's you could get that guy and they will bring prestige, but a lot of times it should, for me, when I play Call of Duty, when someone was doing better than me and my friends, I had to step up my game. I have to, be better, and it got to a point where we were just competing against each other. But that's what makes us good. So the last question Jacob has for us is he wants to know, because Madden is so big in America, but do games like Madden count as esports, competitive Madden?
To be good at Madden, it does take a lot of practice. Madden, you can be good casually, but when you play it competitively, it's really tough to be that good. So you have to put in a lot of hours. But I don't know how big the fan base is, or how big the community is for Madden.
For competitive.
Yeah, for competitive Madden. So that's the big question I have, is just that I don't know how big their competitive Madden community is. I haven't even really seen any Madden tournaments or anything like that. So that's my problem with it, is that I know how many hours it would take to be good, and it's a lot, but I don't know how big the actual community is for that, so I'm not sure.
It's really interesting, because I think almost any game, if you sell it right, if there are enough people, if there's backing, can become esports. Mm-hmm. If I looked at all video games, all the genres, and someone told me that RTSs will be esports, I would have laughed, because it's such a weird concept. You're controlling a massive amount of characters versus another person, and it's not as visceral as a fighting game or a shooter, where it's really relatable to 1-on-1 or 5-on-5 match.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment, no, it certainly isn't esports, but maybe one day.
I think definitely Madden is a competitive game. I personally don't know any Madden players. I don't play any sports types of video games, but I do know I do know of one tournament that I've ever seen, a Madden tournament. It is one that GameStop hosted when it very first came out, when GameStop used to host tournaments, and I walked in when they were having a Madden tournament, and definitely I think the community's there. I just think there's not enough backing for it.
Okay.
Whereas there's going to be FPS games, fighting games, RPGs, all that other type of stuff. Because then you do have Because I do know like a smaller type of thing that I do watch on Twitch is speedruns.
No, yeah.
And then before I thought speedruns were absolutely, I thought they were ridiculous. I was like, you guys are trying to beat the game really fast.
Yeah.
And then actually I started watching them. I was like, okay, this is actually a real thing, and people are actually trying to fight for world records for that. So I mean, if that can be, I consider speedruns an esport too. It depends on what kind of speedrun it is, because there is modded, there is regular. I definitely consider more regular more of an esport, because it does take a lot more repetition, stuff like that, and you do mess up, you're done.
Okay.
It's gonna jack up your time. So I mean, I do think a game like Madden can definitely be there. It's just there is no backing for it, like you said, and there is definitely a community there, because I know when the new Madden comes out, everyone's hyped up about
There's a
it.
community, yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing, I don't know if you guys ever saw this, but there was a show on ESPN2 called Madden Nation, and Madden Nation was where, I don't remember which Madden it was, but they got these guys who were like the best Madden players around the country, and they got them together to play. Like they put them on teams, but they would, kind of prize fight them. Like it's got to be 1-on-1. So it's like when they had a competition or whatever, this team won, they get to choose who they send against one of the guys. And it's funny because the guy who was the Niner fan, like, was knocking guys left and right. Like this was when. I want to say Alex Smith was on the team, but he wasn't great. So it was the dark ages. But no, it was like the big teams were like the Steelers, the Jaguars, But they're sending him at him, and this guy was knocking them out left and right. Like he got it all the way to the finals based on literally one thing, which was the other team ran out of players except one guy, basically, because they kept sending them at him, and none of them could be and I thought that was the dumbest strategy, because it's like you should take out the guys around him so that way
leave them alone.
Exactly, because one guy on their team had already won his 1-on-1 game. But that guy was the only guy out of everybody to come close to beating the Niner guy until the finals, where the guy lost to the Vikings guy. But I think the backing has to be there for it to grow to a point where it's huge event to play Madden. And the crappy part about Madden is there's some things that you can't control in any way, shape, or form, like holding. You don't tell your linemen to hold, but they'll hold, and then you have to dig yourself out of a hole that had nothing to do with you. That's the hardest part about Madden. But this is my final question. Okay. It's related to football is clearly the biggest sport in America, and if esports want to get to a point where they want to compete with football, I think this is the hardest part is when Concussion, the movie came out. They had a line, I didn't watch the movie, but they had a line where it's you're going to go up against a company that owns a day of the week. Yeah. And that's what football owns. Sunday is football day. Saturday is college football day and also other sports. But esports doesn't own a day of the week, and I don't know if it'll get to a point where it will own the entire day. But it might get to a point where it'll be sporadic, there's an esports season. Or this is when the big, because when for fighting games, when Evo comes around, that's the big thing. It's
it's a big event.
It's the biggest event. It's not the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl is such a key part of our society where people get together to talk about the commercials that occur. If you don't even watch football, you don't care. But those Super Bowl commercials were really good because it reaches such a core audience. So do you think? Maybe not Super Bowl level, but do you think esports will get to a level where it's hey, what's the big esports event? DreamHacks, or the Evos, or the I don't know what it is in Smash. No, it's on the East Coast. What is it? Their big Evo tournament is in a random month, but you know what I mean, those big key tournaments, are they ever gonna dominate to such a point where it's this, in mainstream media, on ESPN they'll be and tonight Evo or DreamHack, or you know what I mean? Do you think?
I'm not sure if it's going to get to that point anytime soon, but one day I think it has a chance. One of the big things is that so many people play video games as it is right now that it does have a chance to get really popular on TV. I mean, ESPN2 already did Heroes of the Storm broadcast, And I thought that was really amazing that they did that. I watched the whole thing and it was awesome. So I mean, and that wasn't even really a popular game at the time. So if we can get something that's actually really popular, like Evo, if you get a Street Fighter on there or something, or League of Legends on ESPN, I do think that it will have a chance because there's so many people that play those games that they're gonna want to watch it on TV. So I think if we can get to that point where we can just get a big channel like ESPN or Fox Sports or something,
Right,
just to actually start broadcasting and like pick a day of the week and start broadcasting that stuff, then yeah, I do think it has an opportunity. But that's the problem right now is that it's so sporadic on TV. Like I barely see. I think I've seen one or two times where an esport was on TV. So I think if they actually start making an effort to broadcast those things on TV, then yeah, it does have an opportunity to do that.
Well, it really depends on who you ask. You could say that it's already reached that point because esports is a huge international entity.
Mm-hmm.
You draft players, even in fighting games, which are a little bit lower on the rung in terms of amount of players. You'll see people from Japan, Australia, Europe, many regions in the United States come together to play. And if you look at the virtual world, esports definitely owns the virtual world. Twitch belongs to esports.
Yeah.
Essentially, it is an arm of the esports thing. But I think if it wants to get to maybe a mainstream level, to get television, maybe a little bit close to the point of football, it's never going to get there. I don't think so. It's going to have to depend on the developers. A prime example is Blizzard Entertainment. They're really famous for supporting their games, and that's great. That's what we need. We can't have developers making a game for 10 years and then just dropping off the face of the earth. The game needs to sustain and last so that people will have something to always look at. Right? It's hard when the games are constantly shifting, right? And you want something that you can point to, especially in mainstream media, and recognize. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest hurdles if it wants to get that big. There needs to be some stability.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing too is I don't ever think it's going to be as big as football now. Of course, like when football first came out, there was just a few people playing it, and then it got big to what we know it now. But I definitely think that if we had our own channel, like if you guys remember G4, when G4 channel was out, that was at the go-to thing for gaming, anime, like pop culture type stuff.
The nerd.
It was at the nerd channel. So I mean, I think if we get something back like that and we just have it like that, it'll definitely do good. I think, especially now, because we do have things like Twitch and we do have like these Let's Plays on YouTube and stuff like that. And of course, if we give like these bigger YouTubers and stuff like that, give them like a TV show or something on there, of course people will watch it. But I mean, I think the biggest thing is that right now, I know especially with my mom and my dad's generation, is that they don't care about that.
Yeah.
And us growing up, we care about this. So I mean, I think when we get older, when we hit our like 40s, when we have our kids, I think then it'll be to where not where football is at right now, but maybe like another sport, maybe like golf. Because I don't know, a lot of people don't watch golf. It's just like the select few, and I think it'll be up on par with another sport. Not as much as football, because football is going to be the most watched over here. But I definitely think it has the chance to rise up to another sport level. Not so much as football, but I think as we get older and as we start having kids, of course our kids are going to play video games because we grew up on video games. And my parents didn't grow up on video games. So I think definitely the evolution of us growing up and our kids growing up playing video games is going to start coming out now. And then we'll start having these channels, we'll start having all these like games coming actually on TV and start seeing a lot more teams coming out, because by that time there'll be a lot more backing, and by that time maybe it will be more stable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in like China, there is a channel that is just like esports constantly, like it was like playing Dota 1 and like StarCraft and all that stuff. But yeah, like definitely I feel like we're not there yet, but it'll get to a point where, the broadcasting will be there. So I think this is as good a time as any to end this episode. I hope you had fun. I hope you all had fun.
And thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you as always. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm AA Landline.
I am Juicer5024.
You guys want to be on Twitter?
I actually don't have a Twitter yet.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
have Twitter either.
Well,
Well, you
we'll
can
get
follow
the link.
us
Yeah.
on
You
Twitter.
can follow them and then watch out for our links later.
Yes, exactly. You know, we also have our main Twitters. We have at Nerds Know Sports. Actually, Nerds Know Sports. Exciting news has been acquired by another entity that we created. So we have other Twitters, but look forward to seeing our main show soon enough, and hope everyone is feeling great about sports and esports, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.
But
Bye.